Welcome to the next episode of CyberTangent. I'm Landon Johnson, your host today, and we are joined by Kevin McLaughlin. Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
Morning, Landon. Doing good.
Thank you for being on. So Kevin is a U.S. Army veteran of 11 years, and I always like to take an opportunity to thank our veterans. So thank you for your service, Kevin.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
You have compiled, you've got a very colored resume. I love reading it. You've compiled over 35 years of law enforcement and corporate and cybersecurity experiences. You've created 3 global cyber SOCs, and you've designed global cybersecurity architecture for 3 Fortune 500 companies. By my calculation, this is about 3 lifetimes too, Kevin. You're an expert in critical manufacturing, consumer goods, healthcare environments. Perhaps one of our questions today can be, what don't you do? But what we will be focusing on is the problem with vulnerability patching. So again, thank you for being here today. Kevin, there's a pink elephant in the room, so let's just get it out, okay? Where would you say that vulnerability patching stands in a typical, on the to-do list or the issue of priorities for today's cybersecurity expert?
Yeah, Landon, it has to be on the critical list. It's not a fight that we're consistently winning, and it's actually not a fight that's easy to win. Systems change all the time. IS and IT folks, their goal is to keep systems up and running. So, any patch they put in could bring a system down. So patches have to be fully tested. And even when you fully test, sometimes you have issues and problems when you put them in, and then you have the business screaming. So it's a difficult environment, but it's one we have to win. And currently, I don't think a lot of companies are winning in this space.
Let's pick right up on that then. Too many unpatched systems out there. To the outsider, and even maybe to many insiders, it seems like a pretty straightforward thing. Why is vulnerability patching so difficult?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So let's look at straightforward. You would think you get a patch from a manufacturer, you push it out, it's done. So there's current major operating systems that say, hey, use this version on your desktops, your laptops. We're going to auto update. You never have to worry about anything again.
Right.
Then that auto update comes out and it breaks systems, and your users are sitting there not being able to be productive. Happens all the time. Just happened last week, actually. Now you take that on a larger scale and you look at your manufacturing production systems. You look at your manufacturing servers that are running your core business, and it's really bad. It's a really bad day for everybody, security and IS, when you push a patch and it takes those production systems down for 3 or 4 hours. So everybody's really kind of timid when it comes to patching. It's not as simple as just getting the patch and putting it in. If the patches were more robust and less likely to break things, and they've gotten better over the years, much, much better over the years, but you still have those times when they break things. So it's like anything else. You can do it right 99 times out of 100, but that one time is the time that people remember.
Yeah, and the time that makes it a bad day for everybody, right? Or even worse,
right,
shows up in the headlines. So I guess let's go there, right? I don't want to beat up on any one particular company because a number of them have made headline level mistakes in this area. But if we just pick on, let's say, Equifax, right? And again, don't want to pick on them because they're probably just like every other company in this struggle. If we were to look at Equifax, what's one thing or a couple things that maybe they could have done to keep their systems patched properly and to avoid the massive crisis that they're continuing to try to recover from?
Yeah, Landon, I'd like to just build a little bit on the caveat that you mentioned. Most likely in that environment, the security team knew that system had to be patched. They had it on their patch list. They were pushing to have it remediated. And, it was a discussion and debate going on between the business, IS, and security about when that system could be patched. So, yeah, we don't want to really cast stones. Unfortunately, somebody bad found it, and it happened. Every day, CISOs and security teams face the same dilemma. They have the same conversations. What's really going to help us down this road is to build more of an understanding across the business that we have to go to more automation when it comes to patching. Call it machine learning, call it AI, call it automation. We have to have a change in the business culture, and we have to be able to patch systems from really bad security things. Now, and that's another thing that we could make a mental shift in. When we talk patching, let's split it out. We have security patching, we have IS patching. Security patching is the one that has to be put in place sooner rather than later. They're the ones that have to be more automated. But Landon, think about this. Think about the first time an AI that's doing patching takes down production.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen. I mean, they're not going to be perfect either. But the reality is that patches might break something, and businesses need to understand that that's part of doing business. The team's doing their best not to break anything, of course. But the reality is that no matter how good patching gets, no matter how good automation gets, there may be a time when a machine has a problem to a patch, and then, you work together, you recover, and you move forward.
Hey, Kevin, so you talked a little bit about changing the business culture around this. Can you help paint the picture about what the current culture is in a typical large-size organization and what we need to move more towards?
Yeah, so I base this on talking to my peers and my friends and that kind of stuff. And the reality is, I'm going to go back to my law enforcement roots, right? The reality is that from human nature is that an unpatched system is not a problem, just like not having an alarm system in your house is not a problem until somebody breaks in.
I knew you were going to say that.
Now all of a sudden it's a problem and you're going to buy an alarm system. Businesses work the same way. You have the same human nature. Oh, it's unpatched. It's been unpatched for years. Nobody's touched it. It's okay. The reality is, no, it's not okay. And you've been lucky. And as soon as somebody finds it and breaks in, you're going to be saying, okay, let's do a better job. We should be having those discussions now so we do a better job before the bad event happens.
The reality of it is, as you know, some things can't be patched. I mean, I've heard stories like some devices get incredibly frequent updates from their originating vendors. You can't keep up with all of them. Or other vendors force you to wait until, some downstream vendor or a wireless provider provides you with a patch before they're going to give you their patch. And managing this daisy chain ends up being a challenge. How do you organize this within an organization? How do you coordinate this, I guess, within an organization? What's the best thing to do?
So Landon, like you said, I've done a lot of things before I knew what I wanted to do in life. I had the opportunity to work at Kennedy Space Center with the Apollo 13 astronauts and that kind of stuff. And what that taught me is that we don't have to make this rocket science. It's not.
Yeah.
When you have new systems, we work to enable those to do what the business wants them to do. That's our job. When you have existing systems, we work to maintain those at a level of security that's within our risk appetite. That's our job. We do that through patching and other things. When you have legacy systems, there are tools out there that allow you to put a force field around those systems so that they can't be touched, they can't be patched, they can't be changed. They keep doing the job they've always done. And if you think about it, other than mechanical failure, there's no reason to remove an XP system from a manufacturing line.
Sure.
It does what it needs to do and what it was bought to do, as long as you can protect it. And there's tools out there that allow you to protect it. So legacy systems, you have to put a force field around. You have to lock down. Current systems, you have to maintain at a current state. And then we have to be smart enough to work solutions with the business to enable the new stuff they want to do. And really, if you boil it down that way, that kind of sums up, what we need to do from a patching perspective.
Sounds simple.
It does. It's hard. It is hard. I'm not making light of it, but it's also not rocket science conceptually, in theory. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
It's just hard to do because there's so many pieces that have to engage. Pieces, human components, machine components, third-party vendors that have to tie in. There's just a lot of moving pieces that all have to align.
Yeah, so it fits into the simple but not easy category. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Something you said earlier that I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit more about. You talked about the risk appetite being an important component of this. What does this concept of risk appetite, what does that conversation look like when it's done well within an organization surrounding patching?
It's a very interesting question. So I'll take an example. Within my patching strategies, typically what I like to do is I will work with the executives and explain to them that during the first rounds of patching, we're going to get rid of all of the very critical, exploitable vulnerabilities. So the 5 or the catastrophic, if you will. Then we'll move down to the next tier, which are the critical and, what would be number 4, depending what tool you're using. And do them in those step stages like that so that you're not trying to do it all at one time. I remember coming into a company, and my second day in the company, a guy from security came over, and I was in security, but I was on an operational team. He came over and he put a PDF on my desk. Landon, no lie, it was 14,000 pages long. And he said, your job is to make sure IS patches all these. When he left, I threw it in the garbage. There's no way. I'm not even going to have that conversation with anybody. Now, throughout my time there, I worked with that person and came to a way that we could have IS patch the things that are really critical first, then the next things. And we actually got the environment into a very good state following that approach. But could you imagine if I went to anybody in IS and put a 14,000 page document on there? I tried to open it electronically and it took like 4 or 5 minutes to open. There's no way they would even engage or even talk to you about doing that. But what the tool showed the security team was, here's all the patches that have to be, to include all the minors. So go fix them. Well, the reality is if you take the catastrophic and critical ones first, as you patch those, a lot of those same patches are going to fix all the lower ones anyways. Okay. And then you just go down that chain.
With respect to the risk appetite component, what percentage of, let's just pull out the Fortune 500 companies, what percentage of the Fortune 500 companies are having functional, well-communicated discussions around risk appetite and integrating that into their approach to security and patch management?
The answer to that question is a lot more than there were 2 years ago. Public awareness, corporate awareness has really been raised over the last couple of years. It's no longer a case where, from a security standpoint, at least in the environments I've worked in, it's no longer a case where we have to sell people on why this is important. It's no longer a case of even being afraid that you might push hard and have somebody from the executive team say, no, you can't do that. Within the mainstream Fortune 500, I'm comfortable, at least in my experience, I'm comfortable that if somebody wants to leave an unpatched system in my environment and just leave it unpatched, that there's not an executive in my company or companies I've worked for that would allow that to happen. It's really changed over the years. Now, you still have those discussions about what's the risk, how do you mitigate it, what's the best way to mitigate, can we leave it in place through month's end so that we can get our books closed? How would we be safe doing that? Can you put extra logging around it, extra eyes on the security alerts coming out of the box, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the culture has changed dramatically in favor of the security point of view and the security view of what needs to happen across the environments.
That's great. That's encouraging. It seems to me like the next step is this idea of risk transference, which seems to be a bit of a hot topic in the industry today. Can you help answer the same question with respect to risk transference, transferring risk throughout the organization where it's quote unquote supposed to be owned and more rightfully owned? Where are we with that conversation with the big organizations?
So when it comes to those risk transference discussions, you really do have to have a formalized risk acceptance program within the organization. Something that the business owner, system owner will sign off on, something the CISO signs off on. I remember early on with Sarbanes-Oxley, we had people in the business that wanted to accept risk. And what we did is they wrote the business reasoning behind why they wanted to accept the risk. That was signed by the VP of the division. And then it came to the CISO, and the CISO either signed it or forwarded on to his executive leadership for further discussion. 9 times out of 10, there was a very legitimate business reason for, why it would be acceptable to leave a risk in place. And those were signed and documented. We had the audit trail, which the auditors really liked. They were revisited every year to make sure that risk was still viable. Sometimes it was, the risk was simple, like, we don't want to replace this $3,000 printer because we have a new one coming 3 months from now. So we want to accept the risk for those 3 months. And that discussion happened, and then the risk was accepted for those 3 months. The whole idea of risk transference is a good one, and it has to happen. The person that has to accept the risk is the person who's responsible initially, and that's critical. That way, management at least gets a true picture of all the risk across the company. If people are just accepting risk with no formal process, then there's all kinds of risk in the organization that senior management, who's ultimately responsible, has no knowledge of whatsoever. So what has to happen is the divisional leaders have to accept the risk. Then it has to be accepted by somebody within the security chain, because at the end of the day, it's supposed to be our job to help level set risk appetites if they're incorrect. I really dislike, and I really hate to hear a security person say, the risk appetite is all about the business. Well, if it's all about the business, then why in the heck did they hire you?
Yeah.
You have to help educate, engage if they're making a silly decision. If they want to walk down a dark alley in a major city at 3 a.m. and you're with them, it's probably your job to say, oh, time out, probably not a good idea. Let's take an extra 5 minutes to go around, and here's why. There's been 15 muggings in that alley in the last year. That's kind of our job. But once that discussions happen and once that risk appetite's accepted, then it just needs to be documented and it needs to be revisited periodically because, as you know, the security landscape changes. So as that landscape changes, that risk level may go up. It may exceed the risk appetite that was originally agreed upon. And then you have to engage in those discussions further. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when you go to the board meeting and you have that risk exception, you have to outline the risks that are across the organization, and you have to have the board of directors and the senior leadership say, we're accepting those risks. It makes sense to have those while we're doing business.
So I love the way, Kevin, that you talk about shifting the way an organization thinks and shifting the culture within the organization. Let me take us for a moment on a cyber tangent, which is the name of our podcast, by the way, and pull upon your experience running and implementing cyber operations and architecture for the big guys, for the Fortune 500 companies. Historically, patch management, vulnerability management has not been glamorous. It's not a sexy role. There's a ton of moving parts, like you've said, and historically it's been a lose-lose situation. But the way you talk about it is you talk about it like patching strategies, and you pull upon your law enforcement and your SWAT experience. In your experience working with the big guys, with the Fortune 500 organizations, tell me a bit about how you approach changing the way they think about it and changing the culture within the organization to be more towards this new way of thinking.
So, Landon, a while back, I was working for a Fortune 50, and we had just put in a whole new security strategy. As part of that security strategy, we started doing vulnerability scanning. Up until then, we'd not done vulnerability scanning. Now, this was years ago. And I remember working with my team, and we found a staggering amount. That's a big company, but we found a staggering amount of vulnerabilities. I mean, I'm talking like over 1 million. And then when we looked and saw, the top ones were still like 80, 90,000. And I remember two of my teammates coming in like, Kevin, what are we going to do? And I said, we're going to fix them one at a time. And, that's at a high level, but that is the approach we kind of took. Now, we didn't necessarily fix them one at a time, but we didn't look at all million. We looked at the 30,000, and you know what? By looking at that 30,000 number, by the end of the year, we had that down to under 100. And those were the critical, catastrophic ones. And building on that, we came to realize that if you take this step by step and you do the ones that are most important first, it's case on, right? At the end of the year, you'll be amazed at the progress you've made. That's the patching strategy. You don't get overwhelmed by what's there. You focus on making an improvement every day. On a little bit of a tangent, I text my current team. I text them every morning, and I remind them, what are you going to improve today? What's the one thing? Because if we each improve one thing every day, by the end of the year, our security posture is so much better. Same thing with patch management. It's staggering. If you've not done a full scan before, and all of a sudden somebody walks in your desk and gives you the numbers of vulnerabilities that might be in your environment, that number can it can make you freeze. Yeah. And you just have to take a deep breath and say, okay, we're going to focus on these from highest priority to lowest. And we're going to work with, the appropriate business owners and IS owners to fix these one at a time. And we'll do some in parallel. And you know what? By the end of the year, the environment looks so much better than when you started.
You've inspired me. I just wrote down, what am I going to do to improve today? And I'm going to answer my own question after our conversation, Kevin. That's great. Okay, so while day by day is valuable, we also are blessed with, let's say, some really fast-moving technology in the space. What's better? Where do we go from here? What is better? Is it faster? Is it better? Is it cheaper? Or what is better with respect to vulnerability management? What's next?
Yeah, there are so many smart security researchers and people creating startup security programs currently that in 2 years, the landscape's going to completely change. I'll mention that, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but RSA this year to me was just amazing. The amount of new vendors, new technology, smart technology. Yeah, people like to, for some reason as a society, we sometimes like to focus on the negative. I never do. People will say, oh, but this technology is vaporware, this one. Okay, maybe some is. But you know what? There are some out there that are damn good, and you need to be paying attention to them. And that's the same in the patching space. There are technologies in place now that sit on the endpoints that will allow you to patch quickly and efficiently. You still have to do your testing cycle, which can be sometimes onerous, but there are technologies out there now that, you could patch every system in your environment in less than an hour at 3 nines. Those are the technologies we need to be looking at. There's new technologies coming out with machine learning that if a patch has a failure for a certain reason, it's going to teach itself why that failure is not going to have that same failure. And isn't that what we ask of people? It's okay to fail and learn. It's not okay to fail and fail the same thing again. So shouldn't we ask the same thing of our technology tools? And if we ask those questions and they have consistent and steady learning of what they're doing, eventually you're going to get to an automated, patch system that's just going to rock it.
That's great. That is wonderful. And I agree that RSA this year and every year is a wonderful insight into some of the new and up and coming things. I heard AI, I heard machine learning, automated endpoint capabilities. Any others that I've missed as far as things you're keeping your eye on?
Those are the big things. Information and bimodality. The one thing we do have to keep in mind as we bring in the AI, as we bring in the automation, as we bring in the machine learning, is that we still have to have our foundation solid. That's why it's called bimodal strategy, right? You have to have a solid foundation so you can do the other great stuff. So as we bring those in, we still want to be using our current process, workflows, technologies to keep things running and going until we can improve them with the new technology.
That's great. So Kevin, as we bring this to a close, one more question for you. I've heard people dream out loud about the day when they wake up and a newspaper headline announces cancer's been cured. Are we allowed to be bold enough to one day dream of a day when vulnerability management and patch management is not even really a thing? And if not, what will this evolve into?
So I think you've picked up already that I'm a pretty positive person.
Yes.
And yeah, I do dream of those days. And if we do our job and we do it correctly, and when I say we, I'm talking about us as a community, right? Security community. And I talk about the security community a lot. Sometimes I confuse people at work because I'm saying we, and they don't understand I'm talking about the security profession. That's what I'm talking about. As a profession, we have the capabilities, we have the talent, we have the skills to win this battle. It's going to take a while because we have a lot of culture changes that have to happen across business lines and across the community outside of security. And that's normal. I mean, if you think about it, Landon, do we really want our community members to have the same worries and the same way of looking and paranoia that we have? I would say no. I don't want my community members to necessarily think everybody's a bad guy, but yet, in law enforcement and security, that's kind of our initial approach.
Sure.
And then we work out to make sure the person's innocent or the person's not a bad guy. But it's our job to be paranoid. That doesn't mean it has to be everybody. So we have some cultures we need to change and educate. The news is doing a good job. The press is doing a good job at helping us with that. I mean, every day, we have a new thing to be aware of that we can use to leverage as far as an education. I'm not talking fear now. It's fear, uncertainty, doubt if it's not happening. But these are clear cases of things that are just happening on a daily basis. So as we get more and more and more smart people involved in our field, of course we're going to come to the day where we can say this is a no-brainer and it just happens. Now, even in that scenario, are our vendors going to be perfect? Might there be a day once a year or once every 5 years where a patch fails? Of course. Of course, it's going to happen.
Quote by Kevin McLaughlin, "We have the tools and the skills and the capabilities to win this battle." I'm just happy we've got a guy like you on the front lines making it happen, Kevin. So
thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, and let me be your biggest cheerleader in helping you to help us make it happen. Thanks for being with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.